I never believed I belonged anywhere until she told me, "You belong here, whether you admit it or not." And just like that, everything changed. I never expected to find myself here, in this quiet corner of the city where time seemed to slow, where the noise of the world faded into something softer, gentler. Maybe that's why I was drawn to the little cafe on the corner, the one with cracked wooden tables and the faint scent of old paper mingling with fresh coffee. It wasn't just a place to pass time. It was a refuge from the rush, a place where I could sit quietly and watch the world without feeling like I had to keep up. That afternoon, the air was warm, but a gentle breeze slipped in through the half-open window, carrying the faint smell of jasmine from the small garden across the street. The sunlight poured in unevenly, painting long, golden streaks across the floorboards and settling on the faces of the few patrons who had found their way inside. She was there, as usual, seated in her favorite spot by the window. I noticed her before I even realized I was looking. There was something about the way she held herself, a quiet confidence that didn't shout but whispered. She was reading, or maybe just staring thoughtfully at the pages of a book I couldn't quite make out. Her hair caught the light in soft waves, a touch of silver at the temples that only seemed to add to her graceful presence. I was new here, a stranger to these streets, these faces, and certainly to her. I'd come with a suitcase full of hopes and doubts, feeling like I didn't quite fit anywhere. And yet, somehow, sitting across from her, the rest of the world felt less distant, less cold. I hesitated, my footsteps uncertain as I approached the counter to order. The barista greeted me with a warm smile, but my attention kept drifting back to her. I watched her fingers trace the rim of her coffee cup, slow, deliberate, as if each movement grounded her in the moment. The faint sound of pages turning mixed with the low hum of conversation and the occasional clink of porcelain. When I finally found a seat, it wasn't far from her, though I kept a respectful distance. There was something about this place that demanded quiet respect, a kind of gentle reverence. The air was thick with unspoken stories, and I wondered what hers might be. She glanced up briefly, meeting my eyes with a steady gaze that held no judgment, just a calm, unshakable certainty. It was the kind of look that made me feel seen, even though I was barely a shadow in her world. Her lips curved into a faint, almost knowing smile, and for a moment, I imagined what it would be like to speak with her, to cross that invisible line between strangers and something more. But I stayed silent, swallowed by my own doubts. Who was I to interrupt the quiet grace of this place? Who was I to imagine belonging here? Still, her presence settled around me like a warm shawl. The scent of jasmine lingered, the soft light warmed my skin, and the steady rhythm of her breathing seemed to sync with my own. In that space, between the pages she read and the words she never spoke, there was a fragile connection, delicate as a whisper. Outside, the city moved on, loud and relentless. But inside, time held its breath. I wanted to stay, to belong, but didn't yet know how to say it, or if I even deserved to. Then, as if sensing the weight of my hesitation, she closed her book gently and looked toward me again. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was calm and sure, with a warmth that settled deep in my chest. "You belong here," she said softly, "whether you admit it or not." Those words echoed through the quiet cafe, simple but powerful, like a promise whispered on the breeze. In that moment, something shifted, a crack in the wall I'd built around myself. Maybe this place wasn't just a refuge for her. Maybe it could be mine, too. The sunlight dimmed as clouds moved slowly overhead, but inside, a small light had begun to glow. It wasn't loud or bright. It was quiet and steady, the start of something new. And so, without fully understanding it yet, I stayed. Days passed, and my visits to that little cafe became a quiet ritual. I found myself drawn back, not just by the comfort of the warm, worn wooden tables or the scent of freshly ground coffee, but by her presence. She was there most afternoons, like a steady part of the scenery, her presence subtle yet unmistakably magnetic. At first, we spoke nothing beyond exchanged glances. She kept to herself, her world carefully held behind the calm surface of her eyes. And I, still unsure, still hesitant, kept my distance, watching from across the room, fascinated by the small details that made her who she was. I noticed the way she sat, graceful and poised, her back straight but relaxed, like a dancer resting between movements. Her fingers often curled gently around a book or a steaming cup, the smooth porcelain warm beneath her touch. The faintest sigh would escape her lips when a passage struck a chord, or when her thoughts drifted beyond the pages. It was in these quiet moments that she seemed most vulnerable, as if the years of experience and strength softened just enough to let someone see the woman beneath the surface. The light played against her hair, catching strands of silver and chestnut, making her look like a painting come to life. Her eyes, deep and knowing, would occasionally flicker up to the window, as if she were listening to something only she could hear. I longed to reach out, to bridge the gap between us, but uncertainty held me back. Who was I to step into her world? Our world seemed close, yet impossibly distant, a fragile tension humming in the spaces between us. One afternoon, as the rain tapped softly against the glass, I found myself standing just a little closer than usual when we both reached for the same book on the small community shelf. Our hands brushed, just briefly, but it was enough. A spark, a quiet electric pulse that sent warmth creeping up my arm and quickened my breath. She looked at me then, really looked, and for a moment, the steady calm in her gaze softened. I could almost see the question lingering there, curiosity, perhaps even a flicker of recognition. I smiled, awkward and unsure, and she returned it with a small, almost secretive smile of her own. There was no rush, no sudden confession or gesture, just that shared, suspended moment that said more than words ever could. I began to watch how she interacted with the world beyond our silent connection, how she would pause to help an elderly man cross the street, her hand resting reassuringly on his arm with the gentlest touch, how she would listen quietly to the stories of the barista, nodding with quiet understanding, her laughter light and genuine when the moment called for it. And yet, beneath all this kindness and composure, I sensed something else, a quiet solitude she carried with her like a second skin. It was in the way she sometimes lingered a little too long at the window, her eyes clouded with memories she never shared, or in the way her fingers drummed lightly on the table when no one was looking, as if trying to will away an invisible weight. One day, I caught her looking at me from across the room. Her eyes held an unspoken question, a silent invitation wrapped in patience. I wanted to close the distance, to tell her how her quiet strength pulled me closer, but my voice caught in my throat. Instead, I simply nodded, a small, honest gesture that I hoped would speak for me. She responded with a slow, knowing smile that reached her eyes, a smile that seemed to say, "I see you, and I'm here." In the days that followed, the space between us felt less like a barrier and more like a promise, a delicate thread weaving our separate stories into a shared tapestry, still fragile but growing stronger with every stolen glance and subtle touch. I began to understand that this was not a place to rush. The slow unfolding of connection, like the gentle bloom of a flower, was what made it real, what made it worth waiting for. And so I watched. I listened. I learned to read the quiet language of her presence, the way her shoulders relaxed when she felt safe, the soft intake of breath when a thought moved her, the fleeting glance that lingered just a second too long. In those silent exchanges, the world shifted. The age between us became a whisper, not a wall. And somewhere beneath it all, a deep, unspoken understanding began to take root. She belonged here. I belonged here. Even if neither of us admitted it yet, the days of quiet observation gave way to something new, though neither of us spoke about it outright. It was in the subtle shift of the air between us, the way moments seemed to stretch a little longer, charged with a silent promise that neither dared voice. I was still cautious, still holding back, but the distance between us, both physical and emotional, had started to shrink. I remember it clearly, the afternoon when everything changed. The light was soft, golden, like a slow breath held just before the sky turns to twilight. She was sitting where I had first noticed her, by the window in that same quiet cafe. The worn wooden table between us felt less like a barrier and more like a bridge. She was reading, or at least pretending to. Her eyes occasionally flicked up to glance outside, watching the world move in gentle, predictable rhythms. I had been nervously fingering the edge of my coffee cup, my thoughts tangled in a knot of hesitation and hope. Then, almost without warning, she closed her book and looked straight at me. Her gaze was steady, calm, and something in it made my heart catch. There was no need for preamble, no awkward small talk. The moment felt sacred, a quiet pause in time. "You belong here," she said softly, her voice like a warm hand resting on my shoulder. "Whether you admit it or not." Those words, simple and unadorned, hit me harder than I expected. I blinked, caught off guard by the certainty in her tone. It wasn't a question or a plea. It was a statement of fact. And somehow, in that moment, I believed her. Her hand moved, lightly, to rest on my forearm. The touch was gentle but grounding, a connection that sent warmth spiraling through me. The cafe around us seemed to fade into a blur, the noise of cups clinking and quiet conversations dimming to a distant hum. I felt exposed in the best possible way, as if she had seen through the armor of doubt I carried and offered a quiet refuge beneath. I'm not sure I do," I murmured, voice rough with unfamiliar vulnerability. "I don't know if I really belong anywhere right now." She smiled then, a smile that was both knowing and kind. It was the kind of smile that didn't try to fix things or rush the moment, but simply accepted everything as it was. "You don't have to decide that today," she said. "Sometimes, belonging is about showing up, even when you don't believe you fit." Her words sank deep, like rain soaking into thirsty earth. I wanted to reach for her hand, to hold on to that reassurance, but my fingers trembled slightly, caught between yearning and hesitation. She watched me with quiet patience, as if she understood all the walls I'd built around myself. And maybe she had built a few of her own, too. Walls that weren't visible, but still felt like home. I noticed the subtle way her eyes softened when she looked at me, a gentle tenderness that made me want to trust her, to let down my guard. "I've been here a long time," she said after a moment, voice low and steady. "And I've seen people come and go. But there's something different about you." I swallowed hard, unsure whether she meant it as a compliment or simply an observation. But the way she said it felt like an invitation to belong, not just to a place, but maybe to her world. The silence stretched comfortably between us. It wasn't empty. It was full of unspoken understanding, of feelings still too delicate to name. I shifted slightly, feeling the warmth of her hand still resting lightly on my skin. It was the first time we'd touched like this, not by accident, but deliberately, with intention. The warmth radiated through me, spreading from my arm to the hollow of my chest, where hope had been quietly stirring. For the first time since I'd arrived, I felt a tentative thread of something precious, a connection that went beyond words or appearances. Her presence, steady and sure, was a kind of anchor in a sea of uncertainty. As the light outside began to soften and the shadows lengthened, I realized I didn't want to leave this moment. I wanted to hold on to the fragile certainty of her voice, the gentle pressure of her hand, the promise wrapped in those simple words. "You belong here," she said once more, softer now, almost a whisper, "even if you don't admit it yet." And in that quiet, profound moment, I felt the first real stirrings of something I hadn't dared hope for, a place where I could be myself, and someone who quietly believed I belonged. After that afternoon in the cafe, the moment she told me, "You belong here," I thought things would become clearer. That somehow, the walls I'd built around myself would crumble overnight, and I would step forward, fully certain and ready to belong. But life rarely works that way. Instead, I found myself caught in a tangle of conflicting emotions, a quiet storm beneath my calm exterior. There was a part of me that longed to reach out, to cross the invisible line that separated us. Yet another part held back, weighed down by doubts I couldn't shake. The age difference between us was like an echo in my mind, subtle but persistent. I admired her grace and wisdom, the way she moved through the world with a confidence I had yet to find. But I couldn't help wondering if I could ever truly fit into her world. Would people see us together and understand? Or would they see only the difference in years and dismiss what was unfolding between us as impossible or inappropriate? The cafe became my sanctuary and my battleground. Sitting at a table not far from her, I watched her with an ache of admiration and uncertainty. The way her fingers wrapped around her cup, the gentle tilt of her head as she listened to a soft melody drifting from the old radio. They were small details, but they rooted me to the moment, even as my mind spun with what-ifs and maybes. One afternoon, She reached out across the table to brush a stray lock of hair from my forehead. The touch was fleeting, but electric, warmth blooming beneath my skin, like a whispered promise of something more. I wanted to respond, to close the distance between us, but my voice caught in my throat. Instead, I swallowed hard and smiled, the familiar nervous flutter rising in my chest. There was no rush, she seemed to say with that look in her eyes. She understood the hesitation without needing words. Still, the weight of my own insecurities lingered. I questioned myself constantly. Was I worthy of her attention? Could I match the depth of her experience? Would I ever stop feeling like the younger man? Someone still learning, still searching, while she carried the quiet assurance of someone who had already weathered many storms. Late at night, those doubts grew louder. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, imagining the future that could be, one filled with warmth and connection, and the future that probably awaited me. Loneliness, distance, and the ache of wanting something just out of reach. The world outside seemed to echo these fears. Casual remarks from friends, sideways glances on the street, the unspoken societal expectations, they all built a silent pressure around me, pushing me to question the possibility of us. But then there were moments, small, tender moments, that pulled me back, like the time she caught my hand as I hesitated to step into the chilly evening air. Her grip was steady and sure, grounding me, reminding me that I wasn't alone. The faint scent of lavender on her skin mingled with the crisp night air, wrapping me in a comforting cocoon. Her eyes held patience and quiet encouragement, as if saying, "Take your time. I'm here." That simple acceptance began to chip away at the fortress of doubt. We talked less about the obvious things and more about the silences in between, the pauses, the lingering glances, the touches that spoke louder than words. I started to realize that hesitation wasn't a wall, it was part of the journey, the space where vulnerability lived, where trust could grow slowly and deeply. There were nights when I thought about telling her everything, the fears, the longing, the questions without answers. But the words stayed caught inside, tangled in pride and uncertainty. Instead, I chose to be present, to show up, to listen, to learn her rhythms, and let her learn mine. And she showed me that belonging wasn't about perfection or certainty. It was about allowing someone to see your cracks and still stay, to hold space for the messy, beautiful parts of yourself that don't always fit the ideal picture. In the quiet moments when our hands brushed, or when her smile met mine across the room, I felt the distance shrink just a little more. She never pushed me, never demanded I rush towards something I wasn't ready for. Instead, she gave me permission to be hesitant, to grow into belonging in my own time. And slowly, the impossible started to feel possible. The nights had grown longer, and with them, the distance between us had begun to feel smaller, less like a barrier and more like a fragile thread weaving us closer. It was during one of those quiet evenings, when the world outside the cafe softened under the glow of streetlights, that the walls we had both carefully maintained began to crumble. We sat together in the back corner, away from the murmurs of the few remaining patrons. The room was bathed in the warm amber light of a single lamp, casting long shadows that flickered gently as the candle's flame wavered. The soft clinking of cups and the occasional creak of wooden chairs created a calm backdrop, like a lullaby for two souls edging toward honesty. Her eyes were softer tonight, less guarded. She hadn't spoken much, just tracing patterns absent-mindedly on the table's surface with her fingertips. I watched her, my heart aching with the desire to reach across the space and close the distance between us. "I'm not sure I've told you everything," I said, voice low, almost hesitant, "about why I came here." She looked up then, meeting my gaze with an intensity that made me feel both exposed and safe. Her hand shifted, resting lightly on the table between us, an unspoken invitation to continue. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of years compressed into words. I've always felt like I was searching for something, a place where I could just be myself without pretending, without the noise of expectations. Back home, I was always the kid who didn't quite fit, too restless, too uncertain. I thought if I could just find the right place, maybe I'd find that peace. Her gaze softened even more, and she gave a small nod. "I understand," she said quietly. "I've known that feeling too well." For a moment, the silence stretched between us, not uncomfortable, but full of the unspoken understanding that only comes from shared pain. Then she began to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. I spent years building walls around myself, she admitted, wearing strength like armor. But beneath that, there's been loneliness, quiet, patient, sometimes aching. I didn't know how to let anyone in. Her words hung in the air, fragile and real, like a secret finally released. I reached across the table slowly, my fingers brushing hers in a tentative gesture of solidarity. The warmth of her skin against mine was electric, a silent promise that vulnerability could be safe. That loneliness, I murmured. It's like carrying a shadow you can't shake. She nodded, her thumb tracing soft circles on the back of my hand. Exactly. But maybe we don't have to carry it alone anymore. Her words wrapped around me, soothing and hopeful. It was the first time I felt truly seen. Not just the restless young man searching for belonging, but the sum of all my fears and hopes laid bare. The subtle touch of her hand sent a steady pulse through me. I felt my shoulders relax, the tightness in my chest loosening just enough to breathe. We sat like that for a while, hands intertwined, letting the quiet speak louder than any conversation could. Outside, the night deepened, but inside, a fragile warmth blossomed between us, gentle and steady, like the first flicker of a flame resisting the darkness. Her cheek brushed against my hand briefly, an unspoken gesture of comfort and trust. I wanted to hold her closer, to let the moment stretch on forever, but I was careful to keep the connection tender and respectful. This was about more than physical closeness. It was about building something solid from the fragments of broken hopes and guarded hearts. I realized then that the age between us mattered less and less. What mattered was this moment of shared honesty, this willingness to let someone see you in all your imperfections. As we slowly pulled our hands apart, I felt a newfound strength settle inside me, a quiet assurance that maybe, just maybe, I was no longer alone. She smiled softly, a gentle warmth lighting her eyes. We're both still learning, she said, and that's okay. Her words settled around me like a balm. I wanted to tell her that I felt the same, that I was ready to learn, to grow, to belong, but the words didn't come yet. Instead, I simply nodded, letting the truth between us speak for itself. And in that shared vulnerability, something shifted. We had crossed an invisible threshold, the point where hesitation gave way to trust, and two lonely souls began to weave their stories together. The days that followed our shared vulnerability felt like a gentle unfolding, a slow awakening to something both fragile and undeniable. We didn't rush to name what was blossoming between us. Instead, we let it grow in the spaces between words, in the small moments that carried more meaning than any grand declaration. It began with the quietest of gestures, subtle touches that spoke volumes. One rainy afternoon, as the sky darkened and the first drops began to fall, I found myself waiting outside the cafe with an umbrella. When she emerged, her coat pulled tight against the chill, I stepped forward without hesitation, holding the umbrella over her head. She paused, surprise flickering in her eyes, before a soft smile curved her lips. "Thank you," she said, her voice warm despite the cold air. The umbrella became our shared shelter, not just from the rain, but from the invisible walls we still carried inside. Walking side by side beneath that small canopy, the sound of raindrops tapping gently around us, I felt the weight of uncertainty lighten, replaced by a quiet companionship. Her hand brushed mine as we navigated the slick pavement, a fleeting contact that sent a ripple of warmth up my arm. The cool air mingled with the faint scent of her lavender perfume, wrapping around me like a comforting embrace. There was no need for words. The simple closeness spoke for itself. At times, our fingers would graze, linger just a moment longer than chance allowed. The gentle pressure of her palm resting briefly on my back as she guided me through crowded streets, the way she would lean just slightly closer when we shared a private joke or exchanged a knowing glance. Each of these small affirmations built an unspoken language between us, quiet declarations of care, of trust, of a bond slowly solidifying. I noticed the way her eyes would soften when they met mine, a tenderness that held no expectation, only acceptance. Those lingering glances became my secret refuge, moments I replayed in my mind long after we parted. One evening, As we sat side by side on a worn bench in the park, the world hushed around us. The fading light painted the sky in soft hues of pink and purple, and the first stars began to twinkle overhead. She reached out, brushing a stray leaf from my jacket sleeve with a gentle touch that lingered longer than necessary. Her fingers were warm and steady, the texture of her skin like silk against mine. The simple act sent a shiver of anticipation through me, a delicate ache that was both thrilling and tender. We didn't speak, but the silence was filled with everything we hadn't said yet. I turned toward her, catching the faintest hint of vulnerability in her eyes. The same quiet strength that had drawn me in from the start, now softened by something deeper, more intimate. Her cheek brushed against my shoulder in a gesture so light I almost missed it, but it left an impression, a gentle reassurance that I was not alone, that this moment was ours. As night fell, the cool air wrapped around us, but the warmth between us grew stronger. I wanted to reach for her hand, to close the distance that still lingered, but I held back, savoring the slow build of tension that pulsed quietly beneath the surface. This was not a rush towards something fleeting. It was a careful dance, a tender weaving of two lives slowly drawing nearer. The world outside might not understand the age between us, but in these moments, it didn't matter. What mattered was the quiet certainty growing with every touch, every look, every shared breath. I felt myself changing, becoming more open, more present. The walls I'd built were softening under the weight of her steady kindness. And she was patient, never pushing, never demanding more than I was ready to give. One night, after walking her to her door, I lingered for a moment in the shadowed porch light. She turned to me with a smile that held something unspoken, a promise, a hope, a beginning. Before I could speak, she reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear, her fingers brushing my skin with a tenderness that left me breathless. "You belong here," she whispered again, the words like a gentle anchor. I nodded, my voice caught in the swell of emotion rising within me. "Maybe. I'm starting to believe it." She smiled, and in that smile, I found the courage to hope that maybe, together, we could build something real, something that belonged. The evening air was cool but gentle, carrying the faint scent of blooming jasmine from the garden nearby. We found ourselves sitting side by side on the weathered bench beneath the old oak tree, the fading light painting everything in soft amber and rose. It was the kind of moment that felt suspended between the past and whatever future waited beyond. For so long, I had carried a quiet storm inside, a tempest of doubt, hesitation, and unspoken questions. But here, with her close beside me, the turbulence seemed to settle, replaced by a calm I hadn't known I was searching for. She shifted slightly, the subtle warmth of her body brushing against mine. It was a touch so light, so unassuming, but it sent a steady pulse through my chest, a reminder that connection doesn't always need grand gestures. Sometimes, it's in the smallest closeness that the deepest truths are found. Her hand found mine, fingers intertwining with a familiarity that surprised me, like they had always belonged there. The texture of her skin against mine was warm and steady, grounding me in the moment. "You've been holding so much inside," she said softly, her voice a soothing balm against the quiet evening. I looked at her then, really looked, into the depths of her eyes, where I saw kindness, strength, and a patient love that had quietly grown over time. "I've been afraid," I admitted, my voice low and honest. "Afraid that I wouldn't be enough, that this, us, was too fragile to last." She squeezed my hand gently, her touch reassuring. "Belonging isn't about being perfect," she whispered. "It's about being seen, accepted, even with all the doubts and fears. And I see you." Her words wrapped around me like a warm shawl, dispelling years of loneliness in their quiet certainty. I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight I had carried begin to lift. Here, with her, I could let go of pretense and just be. The age between us, the thing that had felt like a barrier, now seemed like a delicate thread weaving us closer, connecting our stories rather than dividing them. She rested her head lightly against my shoulder, her breath soft and steady, and for the first time, I didn't question whether I belonged. I knew I did. The world around us blurred, the rustling leaves, the distant city lights, the gentle chorus of evening birds, all fading into the background of this quiet, shared peace. We sat together, hands still entwined, letting the silence speak volumes. In that moment, everything felt right. No words were needed to seal the truth we both carried. The truth that sometimes, belonging finds you when you least expect it, in the most unexpected places, with the most unexpected people. She lifted her head and smiled, a smile that held promises of tomorrows yet to come. "I'm glad you stayed," she said softly. "So am I," I replied, feeling a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the fading sunlight. The night deepened around us, but inside, a quiet light glowed, steady and unwavering. And as we sat beneath that old oak tree, I realized that this was home. Not just a place, but a feeling. A feeling of being truly seen, truly accepted, truly belonging. At last,